One. Yes, we have Pa Ikide today. Pa Ikide, if you do us the honor to introduce yourself to those people who don't know you.
That's a difficult one. Who am I? I don't really know. Depending on who uh, is talking about me, there will be a few opinions about who I am and what I do. I consider myself a reader who writes on occasion. My passion, of course, is narrative. Lately, I've been very interested in the politics of narrative when it applies to what people call African literature. I have been referred to as loud and opinionated, especially when it comes to um, African literature in politics, Nigerian politics. Uh, I will only say that I will not write my obituary. I will let you young folks write whatever you want about me when I move on to the next pantheon. I have a blog where I pretty much dump all of my personal opinions on whatever fancies me. I have quite a substantial following on social media, especially young folks on Twitter, on Facebook. And I wake up in the morning and my mind starts to talk to me, and I begin to share whatever is in my mind. Some of it is not quite pleasant, but I can't help myself. I just say what uh, my ancestors tell me to say in the morning, and then I go to work. And that's me.
Fantastic. I mean, on social media, you are a
Yeah.
very strong advocate for the internet um, being used as an avenue for reading. Um, I mean, does the reader really need to read a book, or should they all go to the internet for reading?
Well, I think that my views on that issue have been simplified to create a convenient binary for a pretend debate. I have said that we should be respectful of where the reader is today. And I have said that the reader is not reading books, and we should ask ourselves why, uh, and then adjust our preferences, our writing preferences to meet our audience where um, the members are. Uh, it is hard to argue otherwise. Millions of Nigerians, millions of Africans are on the internet and they are reading nonstop. They just don't realize they are reading. By the end of the day, typically, most young Nigerians have read the equivalent of chapters of books, not in books, but on social media. They are self medicating. That's a huge problem. I call it a failure of leadership. A lot of our intellectuals and writers and thinkers, not only in Africa, by the way, everywhere in the world, they are sequestered in behind four walls, writing important stuff that very few people besides themselves read. Uh, More and more these days, people will not go to a book unless they are of a particular demographic, unless they are of a particular age, or unless they have to pass an exam. So we have to think about these things and figure out ways to move young folks, especially young Africans, from self medicating on things they really ought not to be reading, a lot of it on the internet, to things they should be reading in addition to what they are currently reading. We're not doing that. We're just looking down on them and saying these folks are not reading. That's it. I have a problem with that. In terms of the narrative, when it comes to uh, the narrative of those of us people call Africa, if you look at the publishing industry, it
Yeah.
barely exists in Africa, barely exists. Trying to get published in Africa is difficult. Trying to get published in the West is even more difficult. It's like waiting to win a lottery. And when you do, the result is usually the result of your narrative is usually not how you began. There's been heavy editing of it just to make it appeal to Western tastes. And increasingly, we are finding that these are the books that represent Africa. I have a huge problem with that. no scientist would draw conclusions from 0.01% of a sample, of a huge sample. 99.9% of reading of African literature today, you will agree with me, is on social media, it's on the blogs, it's all digital. Why are we using books of a few people to determine what is African narrative? I am surprised people don't have a problem with that.
I mean, so there has to be a separation between the definition of African literature by books and definition of African literature on social media.
I don't know that I would do a separation. I think that they are all important narratives. I never scoff at narrative. Narrative is very important. What draws someone from saying something? I would never, even if it appears so, I would never really dismiss what someone is trying to communicate to me. What I dismiss is the notion that the only narrative that matters to the world is what is written in those heavily edited books. That's just not true. You see, is there? And then when you understand, when you look at the data, and you realize that over 90% of the folks writing on Africa in those books, those that the West call the voice of Africa, are diaspora writers, people like you that are out there, that have been in Europe, in America, in all of these places for decades. They are still writing about Africa that they left behind. Meanwhile, the indigenous African writers on the ground continue to write, but nobody listens to them. We need to change that paradigm. I think we should listen to all sides. That's my point. When you go to London for Africa Writes and look around you, who are the people, who are the star writers? We go there to look at books that nobody reads anyways, and just, we high-five ourselves and then we go home. It has very little connection with the huge readership out there. Every day, Africa writes on the internet. Every day, Africa writes on the internet. Every day, Africa reads on the internet. Every day, Africa reads on the internet. But we keep looking at books in cafes. We keep looking at books in those forums that are just disconnected from the reality. They are all important, but I think counterintuitively, when we continue to behave like this, we continue to make them we continue to make these forums even more irrelevant to the lives of Africans, especially young Africans.
I mean, when it comes to, I was reading an article in a journal where the critic was talking about fresh voice of African writers. What do you have to say about critics when they use that fresh voice from? I mean, is there anything fresh about the voices that emanate from Africa?
Let me push back a bit. For one thing, African writing lacks criticism. There are really no critics of African writing, and I include myself in that criticism. We do not have rigorous critiques of African writing. There is a lot of fawning and a lot of really poor evaluation of these works. I think that if I had a dream, I would say let's build an army of critics that are reviewing these works. I don't know actually what they mean by fresh voices. Voices are born every day. Perhaps they are referring to the notion that we have a few star writers who are basically, as we say in theater arts, overexposed. Each time you want to say something, you go to those same people. They, in that respect, correct. People should be looking for fresh voices, but I tell you that they are not looking hard enough. Everywhere you look, you get beautiful writing out there. I enjoy myself. I wake up in the morning, and once I get off this interview, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to be on social media, reading and reading and reading. Now, you are absolutely right. It takes a certain skill set to separate the crap from the good stuff. it's no different from books, but it's harder. I agree on the internet. But once you figure out, where to go to, these are exciting times to be a reader, especially of the literature of those beautiful people that live within that space of people called Africa.
Hmm. I was reading one of the articles where you said it occurs to me that perhaps my expectations of that tribe called African writers are misplaced and unrealistic. They do not speak for anyone but themselves. But we have writers like Chimamanda through Half of a Yellow Sun, Okoro for Nedi through Who Fears Death. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, would you say they are speaking for themselves? I mean, considering the thematic trajectories of their book.
Yeah. Well, they're two separate issues. I adore Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I think she's been a powerful voice for a lot of issues. She's done to literature, period. She's done to literature what people before her have never done to literature. So I respect, I admire, and I salute her for that. Half of a Yellow Sun is actually one of the most important books in my life, quite honestly. She, as we say in my ancestral land, she wrote that book with her blood. It was as if she was there.
Yeah.
And you have to understand that I was a little boy during the Civil War. She was not born during that war. She showed incredible skills in research, in empathy, and in writing about a very, very important part of our history. And so, was she writing for the Igbo? Was she writing for herself? I don't imagine that she sat down and said, "I'm going to write this for so and so." She sat down and said, "I am going to write about something," and so that's the writer's role. The reader's role is to read and connect with the narrative. I connected with that narrative, and so that's a separate issue. Now, in terms of what you just quoted, I was really reflecting on the old paradigm, that relationship between African writers in local politics within the walls of the societies they come from. I was thinking about people like Wole Soyinka and their activism in their younger years, even in their middle passage. I was thinking of Christopher Kubo and so on and so forth. Now, these writers, these idealists, were writing and agitating at a time when there were really physical wars around a society. I would argue that a lot of it was altruistic. Some of it was they really didn't have a choice. They had to make the world that they lived in at the time comfortable for themselves. This new generation of writers is living in a different time. We have the internet, we have an increased ability to travel, and they don't have to sit in Nigeria and take the nonsense that the Soyinkas had to take at the time. Now that comes with a cost to the larger society, because as our strong thinkers and writers and intellectuals are able to just sidestep the mess that is their society, guess who suffers? So we no longer have voices that are speaking. With all due respect, we no longer have voices that are speaking for African societies. We have middle class thinkers and writers and intellectuals pretending to speak for these societies, but they're really lining their pockets and making sure that their families are safe and sound. That's my point. So we have to, rather than the Ikhide of the world constantly castigating them for refusing to do what he thinks they should do, he has to look at different ways of looking at different voices. I think that what young folks are doing on the internet, what young folks are doing on social media is awesome. They have taken over the traditional roles of writers and thinkers, and they're beginning to fight for themselves. So they allow you guys to write your beautiful stories. You go to Africa Writes, you go to the Kane Prize, you high five yourselves, and meanwhile they do what they have to do. So,
So, in summary, you're saying African writers are not doing enough activism.
I am saying that they don't have to, because there is a new world that we live in. And the internet especially has democratized the ability to have millions of voices saying the same thing. Whereas in the 60s, you had to really write a book or hope that an op-ed piece is published in order to complain about something. We have new ways of doing these things, and perhaps my expectations about writers was based on an old paradigm and therefore misplaced.
Go on to the next question. There's one fantastic quote from your blog. Dear African writer in diaspora, these books are for the West's reading pleasure.
Yeah.
Yes, it is only the West that reads you. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I was angry. I remember that quote, and it was wrapped around my frustration that Nigerian writers, the ones that I'm most familiar with, have morphed from benign irrelevance to malignant relevance, by which I mean that at night they sleep with criminals who are pretending to be ruling our nation. And then in the daytime, they write all the right things in their books, in their op-ed pieces to the New York Times and the Guardian. By the way, they tend to prefer op-ed pieces abroad than op-ed pieces in the Nigerian newspapers. And so I have ranted and railed against what I see as our collective hypocrisy as middle-class thinkers and intellectuals and writers who are part of the problem, who are part of what Wole Soyinka would call the myrmidons of darkness. And so and that's one piece. There's the other piece, which says to me that a lot of what I see as African writing is threatening to be self-serving. People just want to be published. People want to win those prizes. If you look around you, let's just be honest. Every day you wake up on social media, we are congratulating someone for winning a foreign prize, right? Yeah. We are congratulating someone for being published in the foreign press, and we are happy for them. But I noticed one thing: the congratulations and the high fives are muted when they are local. Yeah. Which is very interesting. The NLNG prize is $100,000. The Kane prize is $10,000. Guess the one that the typical Nigerian writer or African writer would most likely put on their CV. It will be the Kane prize, right?
Yeah.
Which is very interesting. $100,000 versus $10,000. I know many African writers who would not be caught dead telling the world that they were shortlisted for that prize. It doesn't help that the NLNG prize is a shitty prize, which really ought to just go away. But you get my point. And so that's one piece. Then there's the other piece about narrative. In order for our stories to make sense to the West, the editor has to heavily edit our stories so that it is palatable to the Western paying audience, and so that in a lot of instances it no longer makes sense to those of us who were raised in that environment. That's at its most benign. At its most malignant, it dehumanizes us. It says to us we are savages who are incapable of refined cuisine, who are incapable of refined thinking, and it really upsets me that we have moved from the the era of people like Naipaul, people like Conrad, and we are now being demonized and dehumanized by African writers. I know I just got in trouble with my essay on Tram 83 by Fistin Mwanza Mujira. I read this book and I saw a book that basically said we are savages. There was no distancing from the narrative. It just looked like the person was basically saying all we do in that part of Africa is eat dog meat, grilled rat, and fuck, and then shit and go to sleep. I have a huge problem with that. And if people saw poetry in that, if people saw beautiful prose in that, if people saw some vision in that, shame on them, is my point. The West might enjoy that, but I'm not amused. Why would they call what they eat escargot and what I eat same thing? They call them giant West African snails. What does that say? You can have a conversation around escargot, which is refined, but you can't have a conversation around giant West African snails. By the way, that is not what we call it. Is that what we call it? So we have to reflect on the politics of narrative. I have to say that it's not all gloom and doom. If you read people like Yemisi Aribisala, you should read her book, Long Throat Memoirs. Yeah. It's just a beautiful way of writing about the people, of thinking about things. She jokes about food. She talks about all of these same things, but you come away that she's talking about people, human beings, who have really thought about things. We need to stop this buffoonish behavior of grinning for dollars before the white man. Is my point. I'm not. I seem to be alone in this. Maybe I'm being overly sensitive, but this stepping fetch it buffoonishness that many African writers proffer before the West for dollars, I find appalling.
I mean, but one could argue that realities are different. A particular writer could see a particular reality that he wants to describe in his work.
Yes.
So sometimes people misplace that particular mission as trying to align to get Western publishers. But at that moment, it might be the writer wants to address a particular reality.
Absolutely. I think part of the problem, to be quite honest, is that a lot of the African writers that I have read are very poor at writing fiction. And there's nothing to be embarrassed about. A lot of what they call fiction is basically social and personal anxieties pretending to be fiction. You can see stuff, and if you interview them long enough, you'll find that they are talking about some recent anxiety of theirs or some trauma of theirs. And unlike other writers, they're not as good at making it seem like fiction.
How do you define fiction?
Well, you will have to go and ask the African writers how they define fiction. There is no true fiction. Fiction is really reality. Do you understand? If you have not lived, you cannot write or read and connect to something. So, but you see something. It is disembodied from you. But it's as if you are living it. But you can empathize with the characters, or you cannot empathize. So it depends on the reader. The reader basically says, "This is what I saw here." I hope when people read stuff, when people write stuff, they are hoping for some feedback. They are hoping for some kind of connection. So that's my point in all of that. If you go to, again, I'm data driven. If you go to my past 10 books that I have talked about in my blogs or elsewhere, of those 10 books that I have talked about at great length, just one, perhaps two, I have, you would say, I have been negative about. and that one that I remember is Tram 83. There is no one that knows El Nathan John that will say he writes happy stories. He just, Born on a Tuesday is a dark story. I loved it, and I said so. We need new names. It's a dark story. I loved it, and I said so. Abubakar Adam Ibrahim just wrote the book. I loved it, and I said it, and I said so. It was a dark story. It just goes on and on and on and on. I am actually the only one writing pretty much about African literature as it exists in books these days, which is a shame. What I write mostly about is just about how I see my world using books as an example. I'm not really your traditional critic. We need more and more people reading these things and sharing them. Now, having said that, I will tell you this. Again, go to social media. People are talking about their experiences of books that they have read. They're not critics, but they're very important. It's very important feedback. If you don't believe me, go to Amazon and take any of your favorite books and click on the reviews. Right?
Yeah.
Those views are more important than whatever Abiola Irole would write today, because maybe 10 academics like you will read Abiola Irole and call him a god, and he is a god. But they are going to go to Amazon and look for people like me who write in broken English and say, I didn't like it, I liked it. Because the bottom line is you want to be sure. Just like you would not today buy a refrigerator without first going to the internet to look at the reviews. You would most likely not buy a book without going to Amazon and looking at the reviews. So it's all about paradigm shifts.
So in essence, what I'm hearing in the background is let the establishment be broken down, and let's go behind.
Oh no, the establishment is already the establishment is already broken down. It's just pretending to be an establishment. You see, it's one person can be a literary festival every day on the internet, right? And then you can create a festival, say in Lagos or in Mombasa or in London, and if 100 people come in, you say 100 people come in a day, you say, wow, that was successful, right? But every day you have literary festivals, you have people just, have a great time around literature. Thousands of people at a time, and it's free. So, and it's not only in literature, by the way. You've seen what's happened with politics in Nigeria, politics in America. The establishments that were created using 19th century paradigm and order, 20th century paradigm and order, are finding that they are having to struggle with the new individualism that allows people to be more empowered to do stuff.
Somebody was saying that if it's published in the West, then it's best for Africa. What do you have to say about that? He's saying that books published in Nigeria and Ghana and South Africa are not taken seriously by the indigents themselves. It has to come from the West.
Well, that is why that is just the way it is on everything, not just books. You see, if it's the West is the asymptote, for good or for bad. If it doesn't come from the West, we don't consider it good enough. It's a shame. That's the way it is. If you don't get your education from the West, it's not good enough. If your food is not from the West, it's not good enough. But what does all that mean? We're talking about it change the paradigm. I think we have to start modeling the behavior. But they make an important point, and that is if there's any reason I will never ever publish a book before I die, it is because of that. I will not subject myself to the indignity of having to subject my thoughts to alien editing in order to be called a writer. On the other hand, I will not subject myself to the copy and paste publishing methods of many of our indigenous African publishers. As you know, the word editor barely exists outside of paper with those folks. If you give them something, they'll paste it somewhere and staple it and send it out there. It's a problem. But the good news, though, is outfits like Cassava Republic are beginning to do great things. But I suspect that they use a lot of external resources in order to be just as competitive as publishers that are out there in the West.
So how do you break down this psychological effect?
It's a larger conversation beyond textbooks. I mean, it's a larger conversation beyond books. We have this colonial mentality. We'll have to be honest about it. Where everything that is good is white. Everything that is good is Western, and everything about us is just dark. You see it in the new religion. You see it in the consumerism. You see it in the politics. You see it in our intellectuals. There's almost like a national loss of self-esteem. You see, people are apologetic about being black. People are apologetic about being Nigerian. When people come to your house for dinner, you are more likely to serve them Western fare. If you serve them local fare, you are more likely to apologize and explain ad nauseum what the food is. Whereas if you go to their homes, they never explain to you what they don't apologize. They give you what they have. So we have to start thinking about this things, and it comes back again to my quarrel with a lot of these writings. Why do you have to explain yourself ad nauseum? Why do you have to make these silly jokes about your food? It's not funny, by the way. So what is the issue? What is your problem? Why do you dehumanize yourself with the way you see these things?
There's I want to point you to another quote I took from one of your blogs. I think I read that one a couple of weeks ago, and I really wanted to question you about it. Where you said intellectuals make us forget the practical wrath. If you are a thief and a thug, you are generous to them. You can murder hundreds. Are you saying Nigerian intellectuals are part of the bigger problem in Africa?
They have now become the problem.
Okay.
Period. When you take selfies with people like El Rufai, and then you go around saying there's corruption in that country, then you're an idiot. If you're taking selfies with Obasanjo and you are saying that corruption is a problem, and you're writing beautiful essays in the New York Times, then you're a problem. You are the problem. So we have become the problem, and the data fully supports what I'm saying. One of my goals is to try to force all of us to police ourselves. To try to force all of us to say it is not enough to talk the talk, but we must walk the talk. And I include myself in that criticism because I am part of that tribe of hypocrites, middle class, upper middle class Africans who have become the new oppressors. And in the vanguard of all of that are writers who are basically writing all the right things while sleeping with those who oppress us every day. You look at the horrors that have happened in South Africa since apartheid. You look at the horrors that have happened in Nigeria since 1999, and then you look at the collusion of African writers in the mess in these two countries. Then it's very difficult. It's just very difficult to read their books and not go, you hypocrite, why are you writing this? They don't ask hard questions. They don't do anything. You look at Chibok. What happened with Chibok? How is it that a thinking person cannot ask, really? What just happened here? How did it happen? How is it that 300 kids, they say, are missing? And still, We cannot ask hard questions that will force the right answers. You see, I always say that you must start from a base of truth. If you don't start from a base of truth, we will never get the answers. Our African intellectuals, for the most part, are busy trying to force a desired outcome on a rich foundation of lies and obfuscation, and in some instances, quite honestly, denial. Let's just be honest. We are misbehaving in that space called Nigeria today. How you can look at El Rufai, how you can look at Rotimi Amechi, how you can look at Obasanjo and Tinubu, and honor these people who have hurt that country, and call yourself a voice for Nigeria, speaks to the hypocrisy of my colleagues. That's my point. You see, and I want you to know that there is nothing new here. If you look at the history of the Holocaust, there were thinkers, there were writers who were basically deodorizing that horror. You see, we have new people like that who are trying very hard, despite Buhari's valiant attempts, to deodorize the disgrace that is today's governance in Nigeria. And I hold my fellow writers, I hold my fellow thinkers, my fellow intellectuals responsible for that mess. The data is there.
Perhaps the reason why we have people like Olusegun and Reno Omokiri coming up with books is because our writers are quiet about the realities they see.
I have news for you. They are writers. Okay. They are writers, not quiet. What do you mean? How are they different from the other writers? They are writers, and they are basically lining their pockets with stories that likely did not happen. But I have news for you. There are two books I read every day, Twitter and Facebook. The truth is there. You can't hide it. If you Google Obasanjo and fraud, everything comes up. I don't need a book to know that he's a criminal. I don't need a book to know that Goodluck Jonathan was a buffoon. I don't need a book to know that Mr. Buhari was a buffoon and an incompetent. It's all down there. Every one of our leaders misbehaved, been incompetent since 1999, beginning with Obasanjo, and their incompetence has been basically hidden in plain view by our writers. You see, how is it that Adeniyi is now the one writing the history of our incompetence? He was one of the leaders of incompetence. Is my point. He's a writer, so don't exclude him. He's a particularly bad writer, but he's a writer. He's an African writer. I
mean, because my own point is, when you play in the galleys of politics, then you come to say, oh, you are innocent, or you are not party to what has happened or transpired in a particular regime, then what you write to me doesn't sound serious.
It's a conflict of interest. And people, you know how those things work. They write these poorly written books. They're not edited. They are stapled together. Then they have these book readings where, obese politicians who have never read a book, who haven't read a book since primary school, come and tell lies that they've read the book, and then they spray billions of naira there for each book. And then, it's a gig. So if you know how it works, it's a very profitable gig. I'm sure at the book launching, Mr. Adeniyi probably left with close to 50 million naira. I think I should go and write a book myself and get them to launch it. Maybe after I get out of prison, in Kuje or wherever they take troublemakers like me.
I mean, so on one side there's poverty porn literature.
Yes.
Then on one side there's people like Yemisi who write very beautiful prose. And on another side, there's the political instability. So how should an African writer write in this contemporary time that it doesn't seem to push the poverty porn to the extreme or focus more on the political instability? How would you...
Well, I think when we talk about the African writers, unfortunately, we tend to talk about fiction, you see. It's Africans write more than that. You talked about Nnedi Okorafor, who does really awesome things with sci-fi.
Yeah.
So when they're talking about the stereotype of the African writer, people don't think about her. She's done great stuff for in terms of expanding the boundaries of writing, of literature, period, not just because she's African, of African extraction. There are people who write historical fiction. There are folks who write poetry. There are essays. Some of the world's best essays are of African extraction. Some of Achebe's best books are books of essays on our condition. Yeah. You should go find them and read them. Yeah. So we are really talking about that narrow sliver of writing that is called African fiction. If people talk about it, it's because it's very loud in saying the same thing over and over and over again, which is we are poor, we are wretched, we are disease-ridden. There's no expansion in the range. You see, just look at any. We'll soon start the season of short listings of short stories and things. Just read them. You know, the fiction has no range, has little range, has little depth, has little width. So what readers are doing is they don't sit around like Roland. They don't sit around like me and say, well, let's just complain about it. They go elsewhere. They read other things. You see, I'm the only one saying I don't like the way this thing affects perception of Africa.
So, I mean, you said we cannot govern ourselves in these contemporary times. I mean, so how do we now tackle that problem?
No, I am beginning to worry if we can govern ourselves. Is my point. Is because the strong in Nigeria, for instance, no longer think about community. They think about the community of themselves because technology. Advances in technology allow that, you see. A lot of the functions that used to require communal effort, one individual can do it themselves. So if you go to my village, you'll find that somebody has built a really nice mansion. You know, there's an alarm, it's a municipality of one, you see. So, but the only problem with all of that is that you still need roads to be built, right? Yeah. You still need communal safety and security and so on and so forth. And you will agree with me that since 1999, we all we tend to be doing, the point we tend to try to make is that we are incapable of governing ourselves. It's a huge problem. We've spent billions of dollars trying to get the power sector working in Nigeria. And I suspect that the total power capacity of Nigeria is probably not up to the power capacity of a couple of streets in some Western nations. So that's a tragedy, and if people don't see that, then that's a problem. I know of a friend of mine who was a multimillionaire in U.S. dollars in Nigeria from buying and selling, and one day he decided he was going to set up a chemical factory in Nigeria using local resources. I will tell you today that he's literally bankrupt from that exercise. It was unwise of him, but he thought it was the right thing to do. But there was not enough water, there was not enough light, there were no roads to get the raw material from the hinterland. It was just a huge mess. And he told me recently. He said, "No nation can sustain itself on bullshit." So we have African nations being sustained by stories, and nobody is doing substantive work. It's a huge problem. I do think that I might come back in 100 years and find that Walmart has decided that America is saturated with too many hamburgers, and they want to go sell the hamburgers in virgin markets in places like Africa, and they'll go over there and figure out that they can build the roads, do the lights and the security as a cost of doing business and move things over there, and then charge us for the light, charge us for the roads, and so on and so forth. It will come. Some will argue that it has already come, that the middle class folks like you and I are already paying Walmart for those things. It's just the poor that don't have the access to it yet. Even the writers that are in Lekki and in Abuja, making all the right noises about being down there, are just fooling themselves. They all live abroad mentally and physically. You go there, they have these cafes, they have all these nice things. They are simulating what obtains in the West, because they have rejected everything about us. So it's in the new world. It doesn't really matter whether you're there or whether you're here. A lot of them are more American than myself. I see them every time. So we have rejected what we see as the wretchedness of our humanity, which is a shame, and said, this is what we want to do. And I suspect that if one day some African nation will say, we want to outsource governance to the West, because our leaders have already outsourced their own governance to the West. Where do their children go to school? Tell me. Their children go to school abroad. Where do their wives go shopping? Tell me. Their wives go shopping abroad, you see. So they can't now say that we should not do what they do on a daily basis. I do not know many Nigerian leaders whose children are living in Nigeria, not to talk about going to school in Nigeria or enduring what passes for hospitals in Nigeria. So we are being dishonest. We are being hypocrites. We are pretending to rule that nation, but we don't live there. Even those who live there don't live there. It's my point.
I mean, what do you have to say about the political handling of the president's health?
It's a disgrace. It's a disgrace. The media aides have done exactly what they fought against when we were all journalists and columnists at Next in when President Yaradua was dying or dead, and they were telling us he was still alive and kicking. You see, transparency is not a European culture. Transparency used to be part of us, but now we have turned everything upside down. I mean, this man is obviously very ill. There's something seriously wrong somewhere, and they're telling us that there's nothing wrong. These are the same people who fought against these same ways of conducting business when they were not in power. It's a disgrace. There are no two ways about it. There's no other way to explain it. But the truth of the matter is, it's not going to change anytime soon, because there are no structures, no laws, no rules of accountability. Nothing holds anyone accountable in that society. So you and I can make all the noises that we want, but until the structures are robust enough to hold every one of us accountable, all we'll do is have these nice conversations. These conversations haven't changed from 50 years ago. Yeah. It's the same thing we keep saying, because nobody gets convicted seriously for unethical behavior. Nothing. People just do whatever they want. And but the same people, if you bring them to the West, they are the ones that obey the rules more than Westerners themselves, because they are afraid of going to jail. They are afraid of all kinds of things. But you go back home and suddenly you become just like everybody else, because that's what you do to get along. You have to. If you don't play the game, you won't be prosperous, or you won't make progress.
I mean, I think it's a mode of survival. So people have to do what they have to do to get by. So yeah. One last question before we go. How do you select what you read, book-wise and on the internet?
I don't. I just it's random, like every reader. I just I wake up in the morning. When I get off this, I'll go on the internet and I go on social media and I just keep scrolling through my stuff, and then I see stuff that I like. and I share it on my wall, or if I see a book that looks like um, it might be worth reading, I buy it on Kindle. I tend to buy a book on Kindle. I tend to buy the hard copy. I like book covers, like this one. I'm reading What It Means When a Man Falls from the Sky by Leslie Nneka Arima.
Yeah, you shared that. Yeah.
I have it on Kindle also. And so there is no, I also have Ta-Nehisi Coates, Between the World and Me. I've read the book. It's a beautiful book. I don't understand it, so I'll read it again. So there is no rhyme or rhythm to my choices. Sometimes I get solicitations. For some reason, people will I will wake up in the morning, my inbox is full. Oh, Pa, look what I just wrote. What do you think? Or I just wrote this book. It's really exciting. People just expect me to read all these things. I have a full-time job, which keeps me extremely busy, non-stop. I also have a large family, which keeps my wife and I extremely busy. So I don't. My reading time is limited. I generally, believe it or not, I'm not a book critic. I'm not a reviewer really. I write essays. And I use the books as examples of what I'm trying to talk about. Then people think, well, it's about the book. It's not about the book really. It's about my worldview, using a book as an example. So some people might call that a cop out, but it's the truth. If you go through my essays, I just write. I write, and I don't give it to somebody to publish. And so somebody the other day was saying, he said in his essay, "Oh yeah, come and beat me." Who writes like that? I started cackling. I mean, it's so liberating to be able to write on my own blog. "Oh yeah, come and beat me. I don't like it." That's not a review. I mean, that's some would say that's a rant. But you wouldn't be talking to me today if I was making polite noises about something I've read, would you? Probably not, right?
Of course I will, though. But
so
I mean, because
I should be writing tame things like there's pap in my mouth.
Well, I'm not saying that. I mean, because the gatekeepers have been crushed, so everybody has the right to
yes.
express themselves in the best form they can.
And that is an important point. People spend their days yelling at me, and I go, well, why are you even bothering with me? I'm just one in about how many billion people in the. I'm not an institution. I'm just sitting in my corner of the world, talking to myself loudly, and then suddenly you are saying all these things about me. I don't come to your forums. You don't invite me to them. So even if you invited me to them, I doubt that I'll ever have time to come to them. I'm just sitting in one corner of the world saying things about what I have read, and you are all upset, and you are calling me names. And why? You are making me more important than I am. I'm just one reader, just a little bit loud. Just imagine me in a bus snoring. Yeah, how's that a problem? You can kick me and say just be quiet, and I go back again to sleeping. That's how it works. But it's very interesting, for someone who has never written a book. I've co-authored a couple of books because somebody wanted an essay of mine as a chapter at some point that I've written. But I've never written a book. So what is the noise all about? Why are people all up in arms about, what I have to say? I don't understand the obsession with Ikhide's rants, as they call them. Don't mind him. He's simply ranting. Don't mind him. He's a hater. Don't mind him. He's this. But how can you call someone a hater when he has basically reviewed, to use the term reviewed loosely, 0% of the hundreds of books that are out there? How can you call him a hater when of the 10 reviews I just showed you, only one will be considered negative? But the truth of the matter is, people like positive affirmation. They don't like negative feedback.
They don't like to be judged negatively.
Yeah, it just seems like they're being judged, but it's not about them. It's about what you're saying about me and my people and my worldview, and I have every right to push back. See.
Thank you very much for your time. Wow.
Sure.